All right, everybody. It's about 9:15 a.m. on Friday, April 11th, and we are here. We now have our confrontation between convicted felon President Donald Trump and a unanimous United States Supreme Court, involving the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland father who was in the United States legally, had been living, working for over a decade, married to a United States citizen with whom he had children, picked up by ICE. They said he is a member of MS-13, an El Salvadoran gang. He was deported, he was kidnapped, abducted, and disappeared into an El Salvador prison called the Center for Terrorism Confinement. The acronym is CCOT. And one thing I learned this morning is that the El Salvadoran government brags that no one has ever been released from CCOT. No one. And over the course of these proceedings, the government admitted that they mistakenly deported this gentleman to CCOT in El Salvador. It was an administrative error. It was done in violation of a court order. This gentleman had previously received special protection from a federal court from being deported to El Salvador because El Salvadoran gangs like MS-13 were trying to kill him, and the government was not providing him with any protection against that. And so this made its way to the United States Supreme Court. Last evening, a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court ordering that the Trump administration facilitate his return to the United States. It's a squishy order. It's undefined in some ways. But the outcome of it is clear. Bring this gentleman back. And now we wait. And now we wait to see if the Trump administration is going to comply with that. It's a very short order. The order itself is about a page and a half long, and then there is an additional concurring statement from Justice Sonia Sotomayor in support of the court's order, and she makes a couple critical things. The government's argument is like, well, he's outside of our jurisdiction. We have no control over him now. We can't force the El Salvadoran government to release this gentleman, and we can't do it. We just can't do it. And Sotomayor writes, the government's argument, moreover, implies that it could deport and incarcerate any person, including U.S. citizens, without legal consequence, so long as it does so before a court can intervene. And Donald Trump has been arguing publicly for days, supported by his press secretary, Carolyn Leavitt, that they can deport U.S. citizens to places like CCOT in El Salvador. Attorneys for the Trump administration are arguing that they can do this to any of us. Any of us. And fortunately, a unanimous United States Supreme Court said, no, you cannot. Further, you must bring this gentleman home. And now we wait and see if they do. So this decision was remanded down to the lower court because the lower court had set a deadline for midnight last Monday. That deadline has expired. And so now that lower court presumably must set a new deadline. And in her, I'll call it a concurring opinion, Justice Sotomayor wrote the following: nevertheless, I agree with the court's order that the proper remedy is to provide Mr. Abrego Garcia with all of the process to which he would have been entitled had he not been unlawfully removed to El Salvador. That means the government must comply with its obligation to provide Mr. Abrego Garcia with due process of law, including notice and an opportunity to be heard in any future proceedings. It must also comply with its obligations under the Convention for Torture. Oh, that seems reasonable. Federal law governing the detention of and removal of immigrants continues, of course, to be binding as well. Moreover, it has been the government's own well-established policy that to facilitate an alien's return to the United States, if the alien's presence is necessary for continued administrative removal proceedings, that they have to do that. She closes it out with the following sentence, and I'm going to read this because then I'm going to read the Trump administration's statement in response to this. In the proceedings on remand, the district court should continue to ensure that the government lives up to its obligations to follow the law, but that the lower court must also be mindful of executive branch power and not overstep its authority. And the statement from a DOJ spokesman after this ruling was released is confusing, inaccurate, and with everything that comes from the Trump administration, it's wrong and it's dumb. As the Supreme Court correctly recognized, it is the exclusive prerogative of the president to conduct foreign affairs. That's not true. By directly noting the deference owed to the executive branch, this ruling once again illustrates that activist judges do not have the jurisdiction to seize control of the president's authority to conduct foreign policy. That's also not true. Congress has the authority to declare war, not the president. The Senate has the authority to approve or reject treaties with other countries. Congress has the authority to regulate commerce with foreign nations. Congress has authority to make immigration laws. And the federal courts have the authority to oversee all of that. So they're going hard with this unitary executive bullshit that, I mean, they're saying under the Constitution, the President of the United States has been granted the authority in the Constitution to be an authoritarian ruler and can disappear any U.S. citizen they want to into a foreign prison in El Salvador, and the courts have no role in reviewing that or commenting on it or issuing orders on that. And that's terrifying. So, but this order has the effect of making Mr. Abrego Garcia the first person who will ever be released from this prison, CCOT, in El Salvador. The very first person ever to be released from this prison. El Salvador authorities brag that no one has ever gotten out of this prison, whether they've escaped or been released. Neither of those two things has ever happened. Mr. Abrego Garcia will be the first, should the Trump administration comply with the order. Now, this is the moment. This is like the final level of the authoritarian scheme that we've got here in the United States. Is Donald Trump going to ignore and disobey a unanimous United States Supreme Court? 1. 2, if he does, what are the courts going to do about it? Is Congress going to do anything about it? This legislative branch has completely abdicated all of its power under the Constitution to Donald Trump, because the House and the Senate are both controlled by Republicans. If Trump ignores this order, what's anybody going to do about it? And it's the question I've been asking since before he was inaugurated. Who's going to stop him? If he ignores this order, who is going to stop him? And, you know, it's this current Supreme Court. I'm grateful that this was a unanimous decision. And a couple days ago, they issued a decision saying that all of those young men who were abducted and sent to El Salvador, every single one of them has due process rights. court didn't order them to be returned so they could exercise those due process rights. But this Supreme Court and John Roberts, they get 0 points from me for this unanimous decision because they created this guy. First, they said that the express language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment about insurrectionists being ineligible to hold office doesn't apply to Donald Trump. Explicit, clear language in the United States Constitution. They said that doesn't apply to Donald Trump. And then they gave him presidential immunity for any criminal act committed while he's in office, as long as he says it's an official act. They gave him immunity from criminal prosecution. This court has bent over backwards at every turn for Trump. They created this. The Trump administration has continued to insist that Mr. Abrego Garcia is a member of MS-13 when the reason that he was here in the United States legally is because he went to court and proved to a judge not only was he not a member of MS-13, but MS-13 was trying to kill him in El Salvador, and a federal judge gave him an extra order protecting him from deportation to El Salvador. This administration violated that court order. This administration violated the order that he's not to be deported before his plane took off. This administration has already violated 2 court orders in this case, at least. Will they violate a third? And the third is a unanimous decision from the United States Supreme Court. Good article in the Atlantic on this morning from Adam Serwer, who writes the following. Although the High Court did precisely what it should in such circumstances, the justices, nevertheless, are taking an enormous political risk. Trump acolytes have publicly and repeatedly floated the idea of defying court orders with which they disagree. By some accounts, they may have already done so in this case, ignoring a federal judge's verbal directive to turn back the planes carrying men sent to CCOT, 90% of whom lack a criminal record in the United States, and 100% of whom were deported without due process. This administration insists that it was following the judge's written directive when they ignored his verbal order from the bench. If the Trump court, or if Trump defies the Supreme Court here, then America will have taken an important step towards authoritarianism and anti-constitutional government. The stakes of the case may explain the lack of dissent. Nobody dissented in the opinion. A clear show of force from the court. The justices have no power in a system in which the court orders are optional. The Trump administration retains the ability to send anyone in the United States to be, strike that. So this is what the Trump administration argued in this case, that they have the ability to send anyone in the United States to be imprisoned abroad, including U.S. citizens. And if that's the case, then the rights of American citizens, and not just immigrants and undocumented immigrants, are meaningless. But if Trump defies the court, there is little to restrain him from acting as an autocrat, given the supplication of Republicans in Congress. So this is the final level. This is the final step for the lawlessness and cruelty of this administration. This is the last thing that stands between Donald Trump and Donald Trump being an authoritarian who will openly begin rounding up U.S. citizens and sending them to places like CCOT. Is he going to obey this order or not? I thought it would take more than 11 weeks for us to get to this point in his administration, but here we are. It took 11 weeks. This is a scary and frightening moment for our country. If Donald Trump defies this order and defies a unanimous Supreme Court and does so openly, Stephen Miller has already quoted, I don't know, whoever it was, Andrew Jackson, you know, back in the day, said, well, the Chief Justice has made his order, now let him enforce it. If Trump takes that attitude with a unanimous Supreme Court and says, yeah, no, I got your guy's order, fuck you, now enforce it. The judiciary has no enforcement arm. It relies on U.S. Marshals, which are under control of the executive branch. Trump. This is an absolutely terrifying moment that we have arrived at. Yeah. Anyway, it's Friday. I hope everybody has a fun and safe weekend. Deep breath.